Welcome to the FemiNinja Project. I am your host, Cheryl I Love, middle-aged ninja hiding in plain sight, dedicated to restoring human dignity one person at a time and helping you unleash your personal power. Discover that it's possible to look like a woman, act like a lady, move like a ninja, and think like a warrior. And remember, men are always welcome on the FemiNinja Project. Welcome back to another episode of the FemiNinja Project. And I have a follow-up episode with the charming lady that you've already met, Elva Edwards. And she is a chiropractor. She specializes in neuroemotional technique and a lot of other things. She also specializes in healing from trauma. And we're going to learn a little bit more about how she ended up on this road of healing in her road of life. So, Elva, welcome back.
Thank you so much. It's nice to be here.
Okay, so let's just kind of review. So for our listeners and for those who maybe haven't heard, the first episode that we did together is that when you were just a baby,
I was 19 months old. My mother and father and grandmother were killed in a car accident that I and my sister were also in. We were driving to my grandparents' house when it was at dusk. It was after my dad got through planting cotton in the field. And he wanted to go see about his mom because she was sick. And so we were on our way over there, and at halfway between the two little towns, there was a farm to market road, and a car came off that farm to market road. He was driving with illegal alcohol. He was bootlegging, and he was drunk, and he did not stop at the stop sign. And my dad had no way of seeing him, so he was driving with his lights off, you know. And so as he came across that road, we hit him. It was like out in the highway. I don't know how fast my dad was going, but you know, probably 60, 65 at least. So it was a very hard crash, you know. And my mother died instantly. My father died that night in the hospital. My grandmother was dead on arrival, and my sister and I both survived. And in the other car, the two people, his passengers, were dead on arrival, or dead, I think, at the time, and he lived. The
driver. And he had been drinking. He was drunk.
Yes, he was.
Okay. So a lot of the details, well, none of the details was something that you knew until later in life.
Well, let's look at it this way. When I was 19 months old, and my grandparents had enough to worry about. They had to move from their house over to our farm. My grandpa had to start farming again, which he had already quit once. He had to start farming again, and my grandmother was real sick. That's why we were going over to her, see about her. And she ended up having to go to a hospital about 5 hours away to have surgery. And she was supposed to be there 2 weeks. It ended up her stitches burst right before she came home, and she had to go back into surgery. So we're talking about a lot of stuff going on with my family. And so my sister and I were, taken care of kind of by just sort of passed around to who could take care of us until my grandmother could come back home. And then she had help for about a year because she wasn't that well, and we had two, basically babies. And so by the time, health-wise and just with all that was happening, by the time I got old enough to remember, we were a little bit past that. My grandmother had recovered. I don't remember having help in the house. I don't remember any of that. So, I didn't have memory of it. And so you don't really talk about what you don't have memory of. And my grandparents, they just didn't talk about it.
So there they were dealing with the loss of their son and daughter-in-law, as well as your grandmother, the other grandmother on the other side, and dealing with, your grandmother, her health, and then, of course, your grandfather going back to work again and farming on a cotton farm that can't be an easy life. So all of this and the emotional
And
trauma that they were experiencing and
Right.
the change in their lives at the age of, how old were they when?
my grandpa was 58, my grandma was 56, and
Yeah, wow.
and my mother, see, was an only child, and so her mother was killed. Her father was already dead when the accident happened, but her grandfather was still alive at 86 years old. So it was my sister and I were his closest living relatives. So it fell on my Edwards family to take care
Right.
of him until he died.
Oh, wow. And they did.
Yes, my aunt and uncle moved in with him.
Wow. I mean, what a great family.
I know.
I mean, really.
Who could ask for better?
Well, it would be nice to still have your parents.
Yes, and it would be nice for a lot of things to have been different. But, I come from a family that's like the salt of the earth. Mm-hmm. I'm sure it wasn't easy for my grandparents. They just put one foot in front of the other and did what needed to be done. They did not, I'm sure they went through, but I don't remember it. Because by the time I had any awareness of it, they had gone through or had their own emotions about it. And I think, obviously stuffed it. That's what they did back then. As much as possible.
Right. So, at what point in your life did you start to learn a little bit more details about the accident?
Yeah, well, when I was a little girl, I was about 10, I found an article that had been written in the Lubbock Avalanche Journal about the accident. And I remember reading that. And it's not like we were ever told you're not allowed to talk about this or you can't ask a question. It wasn't like that. It was more like, we could feel that, or I'll speak for myself, I could feel that when anything ever came up about my parents, there was some sort of tension in the air, or there was some sort of, what I interpret as, don't say more. Just don't talk about it. Because, if you know that somebody's going to get upset by what you say, maybe you just shouldn't say it. I mean, that's the way they did emotions back then. It'd be unkind to talk about something that would make a small child cry.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we just, we grew up on the farm, and there were a few times that something was said, and I mentioned that in my book, all that I could think of. But, then you grow up, and I went to college, and I got married, and I got divorced, and then I was like, what am I going to do? And somehow chiropractic came into my life, and I decided to go to chiropractic school. And, I do feel that there is this thread in our life that we follow, and it just sort of pulls us along our path. And I didn't grow up with chiropractic, but as soon as I found this, it wasn't exactly chiropractic, but it was a form that I still use, using muscle testing. It's like I fell in love with it. I wanted to do it. I want to do that, So I went to chiropractic school.
Now, how old were you when you went to chiropractic?
I was 32, and I told my grandma, who was still alive. My grandpa had died, but my grandma, I said, well, Granny, I just don't know. Maybe I'm too old. And she kind of laughed, and she said, oh, honey, you're just getting started, And
she was right?
She was right. I didn't realize, we don't realize until we look in the rearview mirror a lot of things, right? And so she said that, which made me feel better. But, you have to realize that my grandmother, even when I told her, I said, well, I'm going to be a chiropractor. She's like, well, what's that? I said, well, Grandma, it's a doctor. And she goes, a doctor? She said, a man's a doctor.
Oh,
a man's a doctor. And I said, well, it's like, this is how, she was born in 1895. And so
in a small town in West Texas.
No, she wasn't born in West Texas. But, it's like that she was a woman of her day. And she had not worked outside the home. She didn't have a worldview of things that almost any child today does. But when I went to chiropractic school, I thought, I'd be learning about the body, and I did. But one day I was with my study partner, and he said, Elva, there's this guy. And he can look in your eyes and just tell you about your emotional aspect of your life. And I thought, oh, that sounds fascinating, I said, and I decided to do it. It's like one of those things, and I've noticed this about myself. Someone can tell me about something. I'll know immediately whether I want to go do it or not. And I did. And I made an appointment, I had gone one day to get pictures of my eyes, and I went back the next day to see him. That's the first time I met the man. And he said, I was sitting down, and he came out of an office and said, "Are you Elva?" I said, "Yes." And he introduced himself, said, "Come with me." And I did, and I sat down. No words between us. He pulled out these pictures of mine and put them on a light box and was looking at it. And the first thing he said was, "When you were 1.5 years old, the worst thing that could ever happen to anyone happened to you."
Wow.
It's like, it was almost like being hit, like by I think of sort of like you would be driving down the road and you have an accident and the car bag come out, and just hit you. Because no one had ever said that anything happened to me.
Oh. It was always
something happened to your mother, something happened to your father, and something happened to your grandmother.
Oh, jeez.
But there was never anything that something happened to me. And that was I had an hour appointment with this man, but his back was to me most of the time. And I was just inside my body. I mean, I don't even know what all was going on. It's like,
Were you visibly shaking? I mean,
No,
it was just internally.
I don't do that. But boy, in my head, I never listened to him. It just kept reverberating. When you were 1.5 years old, the worst thing that ever happened to anyone happened to you. And these feelings all over my body. And when I say feelings, it's not exactly like I could put like pain or sadness or anything like that. It was more like somebody was playing pool inside my body and bing, 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 bing. And I never experienced anything like it.
Did you feel like you had been validated, that something, somebody finally...
I never felt I felt like the curtain was lifted.
Oh.
It's like I didn't have anything to be validated about because nothing had ever happened to me.
I see.
And so it's like all of a sudden this perspective, hit me right between the eyes. And it was like I went to my car. I still remember, it's like I sat in my car for about 10 minutes. It's like, oh my goodness. What does this mean? I don't know, But what happened is inside my body, I had all these things like moving around. It's like it's very hard to talk about because I don't know how to explain it. It's like it might be a bit of nervousness, but it's more like just, when you are over 3, most of the time we talk about our experience when we were 3 and above.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The fact of the matter is because we can't remember from conception to 3.
Right.
And so we don't really talk about it much. But when it comes up emotionally, it's more like, you've seen some abstract paintings, or maybe you've seen movies where it's just a mishmash, just a lot of stuff moving around.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of like what it felt like. And that is when people have been traumatized but don't have the pictures to put with it, because you don't have the pictures when you're before 3 to put with what happened, you see. And so I had the feelings come up in my body, but I didn't have anything to attach that to because I didn't have any conscious memory of it. And so I went home and I thought, oh my God. And I thought, well, I guess maybe I should see a therapist. And so I called one and I went in and I was telling her about all this and stuff. And she pushed right up against one of my first resistances.
Oh.
And my 5th time to see her, I went in to tell her I wasn't coming back anymore. Mm-hmm. Because I felt like she wanted me to say that my grandparents were not enough.
Oh.
And I had spent most of my life being their advocate, trying to let them feel that I didn't miss my parents.
Yeah, because you didn't want to make them feel sad or that they weren't enough, because they were doing one heck of a job.
Right. The thing that it took like the 3rd or 4th therapist after that to show me is that they were great and you still had this.
Yeah.
It's like I couldn't I couldn't go there without
Yeah.
help to get there. It's like they were wonderful people, and you know, oh my goodness, I loved them like real big. But I also had this trauma in my life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how do you heal from that?
Yeah. So what happened is that, you know, I thought, well, okay, I that person wants me to say that. I'm not doing that. So you know, look, at one point I remember saying, look, Elva, forget it. You have to get through chiropractic school. And wasn't the smartest person in the class by any means, so I had to study. And so I had to just put it again on the back burner. See, that was comfortable because it had always been on the back burner.
Right.
That wasn't hard. So I put it on the back burner, and then I became a chiropractor. I went down to Houston and worked with another chiropractor for a couple of years, then came back to Colorado to start my own practice. And one day I had gone back to Texas to see my grandma, and we were at my aunt and uncle's for dinner. Everyone was together, and my cousin, see, all of my family was under this same sort of groupthink.
Okay.
You don't talk about my parents. I never talked to anybody about it. But my cousin had married a woman who had not been indoctrinated in the groupthink. She didn't know about that. So she pulled me aside and said, Elva, I just wanted to know, have you seen those articles that they wrote in the paper about Pinky? I said, what are you talking about? And she said, well, there was a series of articles, you know, talking about how wonderful of a bootlegger he was and how Texas has such a rich history because of him and all this stuff. And you see, one time when I was about 14, I was with my grandpa and in the car. I was probably 13 because once I became 14, I drove. But I had to have a surgery on my wrist. And I went back to the doctor, and he took me. And as we were driving home from Lubbock to Tahoka, we passed by what is known in that area as the Strip. And the Strip is where all the alcohol places were. And that was in Lubbock County, not in my dry county, but it was in Lubbock County. And one of them was Pinky's. It had a big sign, Pinky's Liquor Store. And as we're going past this, my grandpa goes, well, I guess he thinks he's awful smart. And I go, Grandpa, you can't talk about people like that.
That was talking bad about people.
Yeah, that was talking bad about people. I mean, I had been taught not to do that, you know. See, Grandpa, you know. And he turns to me and says, well, that is he is the reason Pearl and Calvin are dead. And that was my mother and father. I was just like a statue. It's like, okay, you know, first of all, he was angry, and I could tell. But I also, it's like, you don't say more. Right. It's like this spewed out of him. But then somebody put the cork back in, you know. And so I got a moment of, oh, really? I didn't really know that.
That was exactly. That little moment of enlightenment.
Right, a moment of enlightenment. And so when my cousin told me this, I flashed back on that, my grandpa saying that. And so they're saying he's wonderful. He killed my parents, basically. He wasn't the driver. He was the employer of the driver.
So he was actually this big, well-known bootlegger.
Yes, he was, they called him the Wizard of the West, is what the Associated Press writer called him.
Jeez.
And so I thought back about that, and I didn't know anything to say to my cousin because I hadn't seen the article. It was the Lubbock paper. I'm living in Denver, you know. And I said,
now, was your grandfather still alive?
No, he died when I was a sophomore in college. And so I told her, I said, well, really? I mean, they wrote an article like that? And she said, yeah. And she said, I was up here at her in-laws that Sunday. And I said, Robert, that's my dad's brother. She said, did you see that article about Pinky? And she said, he goes, yeah, I saw it. And she said, you knew not to say anything more.
So even though she wasn't indoctrinated into that mindset or the group thing, she got it.
But she'd been around long enough to get the hint of stuff.
Jeez.
And so she said, I didn't say anything more, but she had to come by their house on Monday. And she said, I guess he'd been thinking about it, and thinking about it. And she said, when I came back, he just started telling me all this thing. She said, Elva, I never had heard anything about your parents. I didn't know the story.
Right.
And she said, he just starts rolling out all what had happened. And she said, at the end, he goes, somebody should write the editor of that paper. Now, he was a farmer. He was not going to write the paper. She said, well, I will. And so she did. She wrote it, and she told me. So I said, I will. And he said, okay. And she said, I wrote a letter to the editor of the paper. She said, but I never heard anything. I said, really? I said, well, why don't you send me a copy of your letter, and I'll check it out. Well, she sent me a copy right away, and I wrote the paper. And I said, I understand that you've done this. And I said, you have no respect for me, no respect for my parents. And I can't even remember what I said, but I let them have it. I mean, with
both barrels.
Both barrels. I let them have it. And I said in there, if you have any compassion, you will call me. And he did.
Wow.
And I was like, oh my God, he called me.
That must be a very brave man.
He was a very brave man. The thing is he also wasn't in the groupthink.
Uh-huh.
And he said, we first talk and we get into it.
Right.
And he says, wait. He said, I am not from here. I don't know anything about the history in this area. I came here as the paper person,
Right.
And he said, I just know that the lawyers said, do not print the article I sent to him because we cannot prove that is so. We can't prove it. I said, well, I'm sure you can because, did you look back in those articles that the paper wrote? Because I was kind of remembering when I was a kid. And
you had the articles in the newspaper,
yeah.
Right?
And he says, well, it doesn't say what you're saying here.
Jeez.
I said, really? I thought it did, And he said, no. He said, I will put your article, your letter to the editor in the paper. Mm-hmm. But it has to be something that won't end us up in court.
Right.
And, honestly, he was really very sweet. And I appreciated him, but he said he would send me a copy of all of those articles. Mm-hmm. There were 5 major, big, long articles that it was a series, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, about how wonderful Pinky was. So he sent them to me, and oh my God.
I mean, salt in the wound.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, honestly, I can't say I had ever, cried that much. I really can't say that I had ever cried as much as I cried reading those articles.
Oh.
It was heartbreaking. But
And your parents couldn't even speak for themselves.
I know. They weren't here.
That's the thing that's the hardest is they couldn't speak for themselves. They couldn't defend themselves. They couldn't.
Well, just like the person who wrote that set of articles, he was an Associated Press writer. See, that's one of the things the man said. He said, look, I need you to understand, I did not send somebody out to write these articles. It is an Associated Press writer. And it went all over the state of Texas. And I said, well, aren't we fortunate? Anyway, I said, this does not set with me. And so I thought, I'm going to talk to that man, that Associated Press writer. And I called, and I left a message, and I this, and I that, and I wrote, and I ended up, honestly, he spurred a lot of my investigation. But before it was all over, I sent him a big stack of court proceedings.
So this AP guy wasn't the same guy who had called you and said, look, okay.
Yeah, the man who called me on the phone was the editor of the paper.
Okay, gotcha.
And he told me it wasn't me that sent a reporter out to do this. He said, I would have never done that. Mm-hmm. He said, believe me, I wish I had never printed those. He said he had had a lot of backlash.
Oh, good.
From
locals.
The locals.
Mm-hmm.
And he said that he would never have done it. Mm-hmm. But that it was a article that everybody in the state of Texas ran. And so when I sent this man, I thought, surely he'll respond if I send him all these articles.
Right.
Or not articles, but I sent him court proceedings.
Right.
But I never heard anything from him. And as time went by, it's like, as I did a lot of research, I talked to my parents' best friends. They were great.
Yeah.
I talked to other people. I wrote letters to all of the lawyers that my family had on this case.
And did you even know that they had those lawyers on the case? By that time you were an adult. Did you know?
I found out.
Oh.
Well, I knew that my grandpa, I wasn't ever adopted.
Right.
I was a ward of the state.
Okay.
And so my grandpa had to have a lawyer each year for us.
Okay.
And
right.
so I knew 2 lawyers that he used. One he used until he retired, and then he used another one or something like that. But I knew these 2 lawyers. And hey, I'm from a small town.
Right.
I knew them. So I wrote him a letter, and I said, I want to know this. And so they both wrote me really detailed, nice letters. Mm-hmm. One of them became a judge. Anyway, he told me how to get hold of all the court proceedings and that I could get copies of them from the state of Texas, and I did. And so I just would spend, my evenings reading all these court proceedings. It was something else.
Wow.
And I never knew that. One of the cases went all the way to the Supreme Court of Texas. Or I don't know if you call it Supreme Court of Texas,
I think
but
so.
all the way to the highest court in Texas.
Wow.
And was upheld. But, it's not like we got great results through the court. Anyway, back to the original question, how I started. I just started any lead I had, I just chewed on it like that dog on a bone, I just chewed on it. And I would go and talk to people, and I would write letters, and I got very bold. Mm-hmm. Bolder than I didn't know I had that much boldness in me. Mm-hmm. But I did, because I felt like this is not fair. There's no one asking my parents or asking me. So, finally, after about 2 years, my body kind of had calmed down. And one day, I'd get the Denver Post. Many times, I'd get that post and just throw it in the trash because I didn't look at it. This day, I take it into the kitchen, and I'd open it, and I'm looking. Here's section A. I throw it back. Here's section B. I throw it back. Here's section C. Oh, my God. It says something about that was taken right out of those articles. It said something like Wizard of the West or something like that. And I looked straight down to see who wrote that article, and it was the same Associated Press writer. Oh, and geez. I came unglued. I said, I made a vow to myself, unless I'm arrested for stalking, this man will talk to me, And honestly, I did. He will. He's going to have to, because I'm going to be his worst nightmare.
I told you were a ninja.
So, and that's exactly what happened. But you know what? What happened is I got his number again, and I called, and this young woman answered, and it sounded to me like what she was probably doing is painting her nails. And I'll have him call you back. I thought, honey, I'm going to be calling you every day. But in about 30 minutes, he called me back. Now, it was no secret that I was mad. I'm sure it just oozed through the phone. Right. I was angry.
You were melting the phone lines.
Yeah, and he said, "Well, I got a message that I need to call you that you're upset about something." I said, "Oh yeah, I'm upset." We had a long conversation, and he was like, "Well, I've never heard of this, and I don't know that what you're saying is accurate and true, and I didn't mean to hurt you." He said. Oh, I said, "You did. You may not have meant to, but you did." And there's kind of a bit of silence, and he goes, "Well, I'm sorry." We talked for quite a while. It was quite a long conversation with quite a bit of anger in it on my part. And I think a lot of confusion on his, I mean, the thing is at the end, he said, "Well, I want to talk to you again." He said, "I want to do a little check in here." And I told him I would, again, send him the stack, right? and of court documents, and I did. And so I called him several weeks down to make sure he had gotten it and stuff, and he says, he said, I want to make this up to you.
Oh.
I mean, is that sweet?
That's very sweet.
Oh, my gosh.
I mean, just the fact that he acknowledged he really did hurt you,
said,
and he wants to make amends.
Up to you. And he said, but I have to, he says, one of the things when you're a journalist, the number one rule is you don't put yourself in your story. I said, well, okay. But he wanted to do a story on me confronting him.
Oh.
And he said, but I'm going to have to talk to my,
editor,
boss or whatever. And so this took a little bit of time. Over time, we talked several times, and then we agreed to meet in my hometown. Mm-hmm. He would come there, and I would go there. And he came to get me at my cousin's house, and, we went to have lunch. And he also brought a photographer with him. Oh. And we went out to the cemetery where my parents were buried, and she took a few pictures, and we went out to where actually the accident happened. Mm. And then we went for lunch, and we had a long conversation. But I had taken the information that was from the courts and stuff. And one of the things he would keep saying is, well, it wasn't really Pinky's fault. The driver is the one that did it. I said, and I showed him. I can't remember exactly it was, but it was them finding in the court that Pinky had lied. That this man had been his
driver,
employee.
Yeah.
But it was illegal, but still. So what he said to me is, well, I can't understand why he wasn't tried for perjury.
Oh.
Why Pinky hadn't been tried for perjury. Well, he didn't understand the money game,
Right.
Anyway, he did really get it that, what had happened. That I did feel that Pinky was responsible for this. And it doesn't take the responsibility away from the driver.
Right.
He
chose to drink. He chose to drink.
And believe me, his family suffered.
Right.
After this. It really suffered. It doesn't take responsibility away from anyone to put responsibility on Pinky. You see what I mean? So, look, if you're responsible, stand up and be responsible. But that never really happened. So, anyway, what this Associated Press writer did, is he said, I want to write a feature article about you confronting me, and this is the way he wanted to tell me he was sorry.
Aww.
And he said to make it up to me. And, honestly, he was a good guy. I could write a story about something that I know some about, but not everything
everything.
But even in his stories that he wrote, those 5 articles, he talked about people like them shooting into somebody's living room and barely missing a woman with her baby to let them, it was a police one, to let them know not to come near his people. And, he also talked about how he paid off the judges and all these people in all these counties, so he keep his cars running. Right. So it's not like he didn't know he was not maybe the person who upheld justice in Texas the most, which is what the lawyers gave him an award for.
Oh my God. I couldn't imagine. I mean, that's just such a slap in the face. I mean, you can't. There's no words. I can't even say slap in the face because that's just doesn't even come close.
The thing is when I was working on unraveling this piece of thread of the story of my life and stuff. What sometimes my family and other people would say, well, Elva, there's not anything you can do about it now. I said, that's not my point.
Yeah.
Hey, I think everything's been done.
Right. Yeah, pretty much. Exactly.
But it's not my point. I said, no, I don't. Like one person said, well, you can't sue them. Well, I wasn't planning on suing them. Yeah. It wasn't about that. It was like, I want to be able to let go of my story, and in order to let go of your story, you gotta know it.
Right. And you didn't know anything until you really started that. So you were close to 40, right?
And
before you knew any of the details of what happened. And I mean, and you do explain, you share them in the book.
Yeah, and maybe even older.
Right.
I was 40 when I started, basically. I mean, I started in chiropractic school, so I was actually 34 before when that guy said that to me, or 34 or 35, when he said, the worst thing that could ever happen to anybody happened to you. But I had to put it aside. And then, when it's aside, that's okay. You forget about it. And so all these things that kept coming up, it's like, I didn't ask my cousin to tell me about those articles.
Right.
She told me about it because she didn't have the same
filter
that the rest of you think anybody, my uncle told me about it, my cousins told me about it. No. It was just going to let sleeping dogs lie. So I feel like that I had a lot of help along the way. I mean, my parents' best friends, they didn't come to me and say, hey, listen, we want to talk to you about your parents.
Yeah.
They didn't know where I was. But when I went to them and said, I need to talk to you, they were completely open to me about it, you see. So just the way you heal is you got to first learn your story, really have a palpable feel of it. And so I would say that healing, there's a bifurcation in healing. You heal by knowing, but that's not all of it.
Right.
You have to heal through the body too. And that's why I feel so appreciative that I'm in chiropractic. And, I see this with my patients too, but, a lot of the things that you're stuck with because you didn't have the ability to heal, to have your emotions at the time, then they're stuck in your body.
Like we said before in the previous podcast that we did together, talking about the physiology and how that actually can bring on disease.
Right.
And a lot of diseases are a result of just the changes, the physiological changes in your body.
And if somebody doesn't believe that, look up the ACEs report, which is a study that was conducted between Kaiser and the CDC. I think it was 1997. And they wanted to see, does a person's childhood have anything to do with how they get sick when they're older? And they found, oh yeah, it does. Oh yeah, it does.
So how do you spell the ACEs?
I think it's ACES.
ACE. Okay, I will look that up.
Yeah, study. But they studied it, and then it has been repeated. And it's never been found. It's been repeated numerous times, I think, but it's always been found to be completely accurate. Right. And that is like if how much someone who's been sexually abused, all these things take its toll on us physically. And this is all about physical. Who comes in with high blood pressure? Who comes in with cancer? Who comes in with diabetes? These kinds of things. And it's much greater when you've had trauma when you were young. And people go, well, I never heard that. No, you haven't. Why? The thing is what are they going to do about it? They don't want to do about it. I will tell you this. They said in that report that if a doctor only said, do you think that something from your childhood might have caused you some of these problems? They had so many fewer doctor visits. I mean, just the affirmation
that there was something
that there's something deeper, that there is something else. Medicine, the way it works right now, is more into, well, if you feel sad, we'll give you a medication.
Right.
Rather than, let's delve into this and see what's happening. But if we really wanted to change health, I'm not the only person that's been traumatized. There's so much trauma out there. And let me tell you, my grandparents were great.
Yeah.
And every person has something. But if we looked at health more from that perspective, that research was done and redone. And what's the effect of it?
So what would you tell people, like if somebody's listening to this and they do have chronic pain or they've got a recurring type of illness or something, what would you suggest to them?
I would suggest that they find someone that, and it might be a chiropractor, it might be an acupuncturist. I like NET, and the reason I like it is very specific. there are other things that people can do, and I say, hey, do them all, or pick one. You may have a different favorite than I do, but the reason I like NET is because, remember I said that I have no conscious memory of my parents or that accident. And so when I have a feeling come up, and, you know, one of the things that happens with NET is we go back to an original time that happened. I can go back to a time that I don't remember. And I will tell you that most of my issues that I've had done with NET are around two things. Almost all of them. I can almost tell you right now, if I had some NET, it would go back to my parents. Because look, what's bigger than that in life, you know?
Really.
And if you go back to, I mean, before that, everything is pretty good.
Yeah.
And another problem was that I was with my grandparents one night when we ran over and killed a little boy.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Those two things. And you see, I think I really got a good feeling in my body about what I must have felt like with the accident with my parents when I can very well remember what happened with that when we killed that little boy.
Oh.
And it was a lot of just what I was talking about, where your body's all over the place, you know. I didn't even realize what happened.
And how old were you when that happened?
7.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you talk about that in the book too. Yeah.
That was very major for me.
Oh, wow. I mean, it was major for me when I was sitting on my patio reading the story. I was just like, you know.
And so almost all, I'd say 90% of all the NET that I have had done goes back to that. But you see, because I can't remember it, and because, you know, listen, I have a lot of things go back to conception with people, or maybe in the womb, or at birth, or all kinds of things that we can't remember. So when I say I'm a big fan of therapy, and I am, because that bifurcation is mental and emotional. The mental part, to understand your story. I wrote my story because I understand it. That's one part. But the emotional part that's in your body, and I would say there's probably more in the body when it's younger, because we do have a little bit more ability to understand what we're going through.
Right.
Just like me at 7, I kind of understood a little more what we were going through. I'm sure I didn't understand anything at 19 months old.
Right.
And so, you know, you can help yourself a little bit. Even at 7, I helped myself a little bit. I had these people came out. I mean, there were many people came out to our house that night, and I hooked up with one, and she stayed with me through until I went to sleep. So I feel like it's one thing to know the mental. You know, my intellectually, I can tell you this happened, but the process of bringing your body along for the ride is what I call it. Bring your body along for the ride and let it have some relief too. Yeah.
Oh, Elva, I tell you, every time I talk to you, it just blows my mind. It's so, I mean, I'm just so honored that you're here with me and that you're sharing your story.
Thank you.
And I think you're really going to impact a lot of people when they hear this and help them with a lot of their issues too. And the fact that there is hope.
Right. And what I really like to talk about is healing from childhood, because, you know, honestly, I have spoken to adults in my office who have told me things and said, I never have spoken this to anyone.
Wow.
So this is what we suffer in silence. And there's no point. There's no need. And, you know, I didn't think that first therapist understood me well enough.
Right.
I didn't think the second therapist understood me well. I didn't think the third one, but the fourth one stayed for 16 years. So
that's so that's another take-home point, is just because you go to see somebody doesn't mean you have to stick with them.
Right. And it doesn't mean that that's the end. There's other people. You can see people for your body. You can see people for your mind. You can get into groups. I mean, really, I feel like I went through this for a purpose. And I would like to help other people who have lost a parent. Do you know that 1 in 9 people?
Oh my God.
I mean, this is kind of incredible to me, but I read it online. Whether it's accurate or not, I don't know. It said 1 in 9 people lose a parent before they're 20.
Oh, wow.
Is that incredible?
I did not know that.
And, even, when you're 12, when you're 13, listen, I lost my grandpa when I was 20. I wasn't ready to lose him.
Yeah.
You need your parents for years.
Yeah.
My uncle, when we buried my grandmother, he was 70 years old. He had his mother for 70 years. Is that amazing?
That is incredible.
And so I see, how things are cut short.
Mm-hmm.
And, yes, we can get by. But I'm just saying that, a lot of times you need your parents for years. I'd say at least until you're 40, 45.
Well, there's still times I wish I could pick up the phone and say, hey, I got this question here, and I was 54 when my parents passed away.
Right.
And, they had a good long life and, it was time. But, it's still hard.
Yeah.
So I couldn't imagine what it would be like as a child. Well, thanks again for being here, Elva. You're just
so
wonderful.
welcome.
I just love having you.
Yeah, I love to talk about healing from childhood issues and loss and losing a parent, because I feel like from my own work and my practice, people feel they can't talk about it. One of the things that has been said to me is nobody wants to hear about it because it happened so long ago.
Right.
And people just want to say things that put a bandage on it. It's like I've heard so many times, you never even knew your parents.
Oh, gee, yeah. So is that supposed to make you feel better or worse?
Well, the fact of the matter is, I did know them.
Yeah.
I felt them. I was with them.
Yeah.
They're the ones I missed. So just because I wasn't able to have an economic conversation with them about the economy of the world doesn't mean I didn't know them. Go to a 19-month-old and see who they want.
Right,
whose arms they want to be in.
So, okay, 2 things I just want to make sure that we make a point. And that is, number 1, the first thing is that you do actually talk to groups, that you are a speaker.
I do.
So anybody who's listening to this podcast who is interested in healing from childhood trauma or healing from loss of a parent, that type of thing, give Elva a call, and we'll give you her number here in a second. And I don't really remember the second thing, but it was really important. Oh, I think it was the feeling of feeling your parents, but I don't really recall what I was going to say.
Okay. So my website...
It'll probably come up to me at 3 o'clock in the morning, in which case I'll come back down here and I'll record that as an afterthought. So, okay, go ahead and tell us your website and how to get a hold of you.
So my website is drelvaedwards.com. Elva is a word you probably haven't heard before, so it's ELV as in Victor, A as in Apple. Email is elva@ecentral.com. And my office number is 303-980-4001, and I'd love to have a call from you.
I finally remembered the second thing. I didn't even have to wait until 3 o'clock in the morning. So I admire you so much, and I want everybody else to just think about this, is that how you stepped up to the plate and you spoke up. You spoke for your parents.
See, they weren't there to speak for themselves, and I felt like, this isn't fair. There's nobody standing up for my parents.
Once again, what a warrior that you were not going to let that go. And, I'm sure they're just looking down at you and saying, you go, girl. So good for you. So thanks a lot for being here. I really appreciate it. And we'll talk again soon sometime, because you're just wonderful to have on the show. And everybody, thank you so much for listening. Really appreciate it. And give Elva's website a look-see. Check out her book. It is Texas Tragedy, Orphaned by Bootleggers, and you can get it on Amazon, so do check it out. And thank you so much for listening. And that's a wrap on another episode of the FemiNinja Project. Thank you so much for listening, and remember, be safe, be strong, and until next time, bye now.